without wasting words with the bookseller, return it and get his money back, money perhaps earned by the sweat of his own brow. I shall do this without fail, moreover, because I just now again remember the story of what happened to a Transcaucasian Kurd, which story I heard in my quite early youth, and which in subsequent years, whenever I recalled it in corresponding cases, engendered in me an enduring and inextinguishable impulse of tenderness. I think it will be very useful for me, and also for you, if I relate this story to you somewhat in detail. It will be useful, chiefly, because I have decided already to make the salt, or, as contemporary pure-blooded Jewish businessmen would say, the tzimis of this story, one of the basic principles of that new literary form which I intend to employ for the attainment of the aim I am now pursuing by means of this new profession of mine. This Transcaucasian Kurd once set out from his village, on some business or other, to town, and there in the market he saw in a fruiterer's shop a handsomely arranged display of all kinds of fruit. In this display he noticed one fruit very beautiful in both color and form, and its appearance so took his fancy, and he so longed to try it, that in spite of his having scarcely any money, he decided to buy, without fail, at least one of these gifts of great nature, and taste it. Then, with intense eagerness, and with a courage not customary to him, he entered the shop, and pointing with his horny finger to the fruit which had taken his fancy, he asked the shopkeeper its price. The shopkeeper replied that a pound of this fruit would cost 2 cents. Finding that the price was not at all high for what in his opinion was such a beautiful fruit, our Kurd decided to buy a whole pound. Having finished his business in town, he set off again on foot for home the same day. Walking at sunset over the hills and dales, and willy-nilly perceiving the exterior visibility of those enchanting parts of the bosom of great nature, the common mother, and involuntarily inhaling a pure air uncontaminated by the usual exaltations of industrial towns, our Kurd, quite naturally, suddenly felt a wish to gratify himself with some ordinary food also. So, sitting down by the side of the road, he took from his provision bag some bread and the fruit he had bought, which had looked so good to him, and leisurely began to eat. But, horror of horrors, very soon everything inside him began to burn. But in spite of this, he kept on eating. And this hapless biped creature of our planet kept on eating, thanks only to that particular human inherency which I mentioned at first, the principle of which I intended, when I decided to use it as the foundation of the new literary form I have created, to make, as it were, a guiding beacon leading me to one of my aims in view, and the sense and meaning of which, moreover, you will, I am sure, soon grasp, of course, according to the degree of your comprehension, during the reading of any subsequent chapter of my writings, if, of course, you take the risk and read further. Or it may perhaps be that even at the end of this first chapter you will already smell something. And so, just at the moment when our Kurd was overwhelmed by all the unusual sensations proceeding within him from this strange repast in the bosom of nature, there came along the same road a fellow villager of his, one reputed by those who knew him to be very clever and experienced. And seeing that the whole face of the Kurd was aflame, that his eyes were streaming with tears, and that in spite of this, as if intent upon the fulfillment of his most important duty, he was eating real red pepper pods, he said to him, What are you doing, you Jericho jackass? You'll be burnt alive. Stop eating that extraordinary product, so unaccustomed for your nature. But our Kurd replied, No, for nothing on earth will I stop. Didn't I pay my last 2 cents for them? Even if my soul departs from my body, I shall still go on eating. Whereupon, our resolute Kurd, it must of course be assumed that he was such, did not stop, but continued eating the red pepper pods. After what you have just perceived, I hope there may already be arising in your mentation a corresponding mental association, which should, as a result, effectuate in you, as it sometimes happens to contemporary people, that which you call, in general, understanding. And that in the present case you will understand just why I, well knowing and having many a time commiserated with this human inherency, the inevitable manifestation of which is that if anybody pays money for something, he is bound to use it to the end, was animated in the whole of my entirety with the idea, arisen in my mentation, to take every possible measure in order that you, as is said, my brother in appetite and in spirit, in the event of your proving to be already accustomed to reading books, though of all kinds, yet nevertheless only those written exclusively in the aforesaid language of the intelligentsia, having already paid money for my writings and learning only afterwards that they are not written in the usual convenient and easily read language, should not be compelled as a consequence of the said human inherency to read my writings through to the end at all costs, as our poor Transcaucasian Kurd was compelled to go on with his eating of what he had fancied for its appearance alone, that not to be joked with noble red pepper. And so, for the purpose of avoiding any misunderstanding through this inherency, the data for which are formed in the entirety of contemporary man, thanks evidently to his frequenting of the cinema, and thanks also to his never missing an opportunity of looking into the left eye of the other sex, I wish that this commencing chapter of mine should be printed in the said manner, so that everyone can read it through without cutting the pages of the book itself. Otherwise the bookseller will, as is said, cavil, and will without fail again turn out to act in accordance with the basic principle of booksellers in general, formulated by them in the words, "You'll be more of a simpleton than a fisherman if you let go of a fish which has swallowed the bait, and will decline to take back a book whose pages you have cut." I have no doubt of this possibility. Indeed, I fully expect such lack of conscience on the part of the booksellers. And the data for the engendering of my certainty as to this lack of conscience on the part of these booksellers were completely formed in me when, while I was a professional Indian fakir, I needed, for the complete elucidation of a certain ultra-philosophical question, also to become familiar, among other things, with the associative process for the manifestation of the automatically constructed psyche of contemporary booksellers, and of their salesmen when palming off books on their buyers. Knowing all this, and having become, since the misfortune which befell me, habitually just and fastidious in the extreme, I cannot help repeating, or rather, I cannot help again warning you, and even imploringly advising you, before beginning to cut the pages of this first book of mine, to read through very attentively, and even more than once, this first chapter of my writings.